In the heart of winter, the Canadian Rockies are both breathtaking and treacherous, a fact I knew all too well as an experienced mountaineer. Yet nothing could have prepared me for the terror that awaited me on one fateful expedition. It started as a routine climb. My climbing partner Liam and I had set out to conquer one of the more secluded peaks. The early part of the journey was uneventful, filled with the usual banter and awe at the stunning vistas. But as we ascended higher, a dense fog rolled in, smothering the landscape in a suffocating embrace. Visibility dropped, and the air grew unnaturally cold. We decided to set up camp early, hoping the fog would clear by morning. As night fell, the temperature plummeted and a sense of unease settled over us. Liam joked about it being perfect weather for a horror movie, his laughter hollow in the dense fog. That's when we heard it, a faint, eerie howl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. We assumed it was just the wind, but as the night progressed, the howling grew louder, more distinct. Uneasy, we double-checked our camp security and tried to get some rest. I awoke to the sound of rustling outside the tent. Assuming it was Liam, I called out to him, but there was no response. Unzipping the tent, I peered out into the fog. A figure stood at the edge of our camp, barely visible. I called out again, thinking it might be another climber lost in the fog. The figure didn't respond, just stood there, ominously still. Suddenly it moved towards me with unnatural speed. I barely had time to register the danger before it was upon me. Its features were obscured by the fog, but I saw its eyes, a deep, blood red, filled with a hunger that chilled me to the bone. I scrambled back, yelling for Liam. The figure lunged, but I managed to evade its grasp. Liam emerged from the tent, and together we fought the creature off. It was strong, inhumanly so, but the commotion seemed to deter it. With a final piercing howl, it vanished into the fog. Shaken, we packed up our camp and decided to descend. As we hurried down the mountain, the sun began to rise, the fog dissipating in its light. We hoped whatever had attacked us was just a figment of our fear-fueled imaginations. We found a small cabin nestled in a clearing and decided to seek shelter there until we regained our bearings. The cabin was old, seemingly abandoned, but it offered a respite from the mountain's harsh conditions. As we settled in, we found old newspapers and journals scattered around. They spoke of a series of unexplained disappearances in the mountains, some dating back decades. A chill ran down my spine as I read about the last known incident, a group of climbers who had vanished, leaving behind a campsite torn to shreds, much like ours. That night, the creature returned. We heard it prowling outside, its howls now a terrifyingly familiar sound. Liam and I barricaded the door, armed ourselves with whatever we could find, and waited. Hours passed, the creature's howls circling the cabin, a predator toying with its prey. Then silence. We hesitated, unsure if it was safe. Liam decided to take a look outside. He opened the door slowly, peering into the darkness. Without warning, the creature lunged from the shadows, knocking Liam to the ground. I rushed to help, but I was too late. The creature, a vampire, I now realized, sunk its teeth into Liam's neck, draining his life away before my eyes. In a blind rage, I attacked the vampire with a fire poker from the cabin. It hissed and recoiled, the metal searing its flesh. Seizing the opportunity, I pushed it outside into the breaking dawn. The sunlight hit the vampire, and it let out an agonizing scream. Its skin blistered and smoked under the sun's rays. With a final guttural howl, it burst into flames and was reduced to ash. I knelt beside Liam, but he was already gone, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. I wept for my friend, for the senseless horror of it all. I descended the mountain alone, carrying the burden of Liam's death and the knowledge of the nightmare that lurked in the Canadian Rockies. I reported what happened, but my story was met with skepticism. They said Liam died in an accident, that the isolation and grief had twisted my perception. But I know what I saw, what I experienced. The mountains hold a secret, a terror that preys on the unwary. I've left my climbing days behind, haunted by the memory of red eyes in the fog and the sound of a howling that was more than just the wind. The vampire of the Rockies remains a legend, a whispered tale among climbers. But for me, it's a chilling reality, a reminder of the night when the mountains claimed my friend and revealed a horror beyond comprehension. In the heart of winter, the Oregon mountains are a sight to behold, blanketed in pristine snow, standing silent and majestic. My lifelong friend Max and I had always been drawn to these mountains, their solitude offering an escape from the chaos of city life. However, our last trip to these snow-clad slopes turned into a harrowing experience that haunts me to this day. We had set up camp in a secluded area known only to a few experienced hikers. Our plan was simple: a weekend of snowshoeing and photography, capturing the beauty of nature in its purest form. The first day was everything we hoped for: clear skies, miles of untouched snow, and the thrill of isolation. As evening approached, we noticed another campsite a few hundred yards away. Intrigued, as we believed we were alone, we decided to introduce ourselves. We were greeted by Ava, a solo traveler with an infectious smile and stories of her travels around the world. She had a wild, untamed air about her, a free spirit that seemed in perfect harmony with the wilderness. Ava joined us for dinner, sharing tales of her adventures. She spoke of the full moon that night, how it was a magical time, a time of transformation and freedom. We listened, captivated by her passion for the wild. Night fell and the full moon rose, bathing the mountains in a ghostly glow. That's when things took a terrifying turn. Ava's demeanor changed. She grew restless, her eyes darting around as if sensing something we couldn't. Suddenly, she excused herself, disappearing into the night. Concerned, Max and I decided to check on her, but as we approached her campsite, we heard a guttural growling sound. Hesitant, we moved forward, only to witness a sight that froze us in our tracks. There, in the moonlight, stood a creature from our darkest nightmares. It was Ava, but not as we knew her. She had transformed into a werewolf, her body larger, covered in thick fur, her eyes glowing with a feral light. The sight of her, half human, half beast, was terrifying and mesmerizing. Before we could react, she lunged at us, her snarls echoing through the night. We ran, stumbling through the snow, the beast on our heels. Our peaceful retreat had turned into a desperate fight for survival. We reached our campsite, frantically searching for anything to defend ourselves. Ava was relentless, her growls a constant reminder of the danger lurking just beyond the reach of our firelight. In a moment of calm, Max whispered a plan to me. Using flares from our emergency kit, we hoped to scare her away or at least hold her at bay until dawn. With shaking hands, we lit the flares, their bright light piercing the darkness. The werewolf hesitated, momentarily taken aback by the sudden blaze. Seizing the moment, we began to move away from the camp, hoping to find safety. But Ava was quick to recover, her animal instincts overriding any remnants of her human self. She attacked faster than anything I had ever seen. Max stood his ground, holding the flare out in front of him. But it was no use. With a swipe of her clawed hand, she knocked him to the ground. I watched in horror as my friend, my lifelong companion, was mauled before my eyes. In a blind rage, I lunged at her with my flare, catching her off guard. The fire singed her fur, causing her to retreat. I grabbed Max, but I knew it was too late. He was gone, his lifeless eyes staring up at the moonlit sky. I stumbled down the mountain, half crazed with grief and fear. Dawn was breaking, casting a pale light over the blood-stained snow. I looked back one last time to see Ava, her human form returning, weeping over Max's body. I never spoke of what happened on that mountain. The official story was a tragic accident, a wild animal attack, but I knew the truth. The mountains had claimed one of us, revealing a horror that defied explanation. Now, when the full moon rises, I find no beauty in its glow. Instead, I see the eyes of a beast, a creature both human and not. I remember Ava, her tragic existence cursed to walk the line between two worlds, and Max, whose life was taken in the most brutal way imaginable. The snowy mountains of Oregon, once a place of peace and solitude, are now a permanent reminder of that night. A night when the full moon revealed its true power, and a werewolf turned an adventure into a nightmare. I never imagined a simple solo camping trip in the snowy mountains could turn into a harrowing tale of survival and terror. I've always been an adventurous soul, drawn to the wilderness and its untamed beauty. The mountains in winter presented a challenge I couldn't resist. The isolation, the pristine snow, the stark beauty of nature in its most unforgiving form. I set out in late January, equipped with all the necessary gear for a week in the backcountry. The first 2 days were exhilarating, trekking through the dense pine forests and setting up camp in clearings that offered breathtaking views of the snow-covered peaks. On the third day, the weather took a turn for the worse. A blizzard rolled in swiftly, reducing visibility to nearly zero and transforming the once familiar landscape into a disorienting white void. I hunkered down in my tent, confident in my abilities to ride out the storm. When the blizzard finally abated, I emerged into a world transformed. The familiar landmarks I had relied on for navigation were gone, buried under feet of fresh snow. I realized with a sinking feeling that I was lost. I decided to head downhill, hoping to find a stream or trail that would lead me back to familiar territory. As I trudged through the deep snow, a sense of unease began to settle over me. The silence of the mountains was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my own breath and the crunch of snow under my feet. That's when I first heard it, a faint haunting melody like someone singing far away. I stopped, straining my ears, but the sound faded as quickly as it came. I shook my head, attributing it to the wind or perhaps my own mind playing tricks on me. As the hours passed, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I frequently glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following me, but there was only the endless expanse of snow and trees. Nightfall was approaching, and with it, the temperature began to plummet. I knew I needed to find shelter. I spotted what appeared to be an old cabin, partially buried in the snow. Relief washed over me as I approached, thinking I had found a safe haven for the night. The cabin was old and run down, its wood creaking ominously in the wind. Inside it was dark and cold, with a musty smell that spoke of years of neglect. I found an old fireplace and managed to start a fire with some dry wood I gathered. As the fire crackled to life, casting flickering shadows on the walls, I heard the melody again, that same haunting tune. But this time it was coming from inside the cabin. My heart raced and I frantically searched the small room for the source. That's when I saw her, a woman dressed in tattered clothing, her skin as pale as the snow outside. Her eyes were dark, empty pools, and she was humming that eerie tune. I stumbled backward, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The woman's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't friendly. It was predatory. She began to move towards me, her movements jerky and unnatural. I turned and ran out of the cabin into the freezing night. I could hear her laughter behind me, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. I ran without direction, my only thought to put as much distance between me and that cabin as possible. I don't know how long I ran before I collapsed, exhaustion and cold overtaking me. I lay in the snow, my consciousness fading, when I heard voices and saw lights. I thought I was hallucinating, but then hands were pulling me up, voices urging me to hang on. I awoke in a hospital bed surrounded by concerned faces. I learned that a group of snowmobilers had found me, half buried in the snow, on the brink of death. I tried to tell them about the cabin and the woman, but my words were dismissed as delirium caused by hypothermia. After I recovered, I insisted on guiding a search party back to the cabin, but when we arrived at the location where I was sure it had stood, there was nothing but undisturbed snow and forest. No cabin, no trace that anyone or anything had been there. The experience haunts me to this day. Was the woman real or a figment of my frost-addled mind? Sometimes in the dead of night, I still hear that haunting melody, a ghostly tune carried on the wind, and I wonder if part of me is still lost in those snowy mountains, trapped with the mysterious woman in the cabin that shouldn't exist. The day we decided to explore the snow-covered mountains of Wyoming, we thought it was just another adventure. My best friend Jake and I had always been thrill seekers, chasing the adrenaline rush in the most remote places. This time it was the untouched snowy peaks of Wyoming, a paradise for two young, ambitious climbers like us. But we never anticipated how quickly beauty could turn to terror. The first day was perfect. The sky was a brilliant blue and the snow sparkled like a sea of diamonds under the sun. We laughed and joked as we ascended, our spirits high with the excitement of the climb. As evening approached, we set up camp, a small tent nestled against a backdrop of towering, silent mountains. That night, under a canopy of stars, we talked about the future, about the many adventures we still had ahead of us. It was a perfect moment, one I will forever cherish. The next morning, the weather changed. Dark clouds rolled in, bringing with them a biting cold wind. We debated heading back, but our determination to reach the summit was stronger. We pressed on, unaware of the nightmare that awaited us. By midday, a fierce blizzard had set in. The world around us turned into a whirlwind of white, the wind howling like a pack of wolves. We were experienced climbers, but nothing had prepared us for this. Visibility was near zero, and the cold was relentless, seeping into our bones. We trudged on, but in our haste and disorientation, we missed a warning sign of danger ahead. It happened in an instant, a deafening crack, followed by a feeling of weightlessness as the snow beneath our feet gave way. An avalanche. I remember tumbling through the snow, the roaring sound in my ears, the crushing weight all around me. Then darkness. When I came to, it was silent. I was partially buried, my body aching in protest. With great effort, I managed to free myself from the snow. The landscape had changed, unrecognizable, blanketed in a thick layer of snow. Panic set in as I realized Jake was nowhere to be seen. I called out his name, my voice muffled against the vast whiteness. No response. I started to dig through the snow, desperately hoping to find him. Minutes turned to hours, my hands numb, my body trembling from cold and exhaustion. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I found him. He was partially buried, his face peaceful, as if he was just sleeping, but he was cold, too cold. I tried to revive him, but it was futile. Jake, my best friend, the one who had been by my side through all our adventures, was gone. I sat there in the snow next to him, tears freezing on my cheeks. The mountains, once a symbol of beauty and freedom, now felt like a prison, cold and unyielding. I knew I had to move to find shelter before nightfall. With a heavy heart, I left Jake, promising to come back for him. I trudged through the snow, guided only by instinct. The night was merciless, the cold seeping into every pore, every bone in my body. I don't know how long I walked, but eventually I saw lights in the distance. A small cabin, a beacon of hope in the vast frozen wilderness. I stumbled to the door, collapsing as it opened. I woke up in a warm bed, an elderly couple, the cabin owners, looking over me with concern. They had found me unconscious at their doorstep, they told me. I explained what had happened, about Jake, about the avalanche. The man, a retired park ranger, promised to help me retrieve Jake's body when the storm subsided. The next few days were a blur. I stayed with the couple, my mind numb with grief and guilt. When the weather cleared, we went back. We found Jake and brought him down from the mountain, his final descent. I left Wyoming with a heavy heart. The adventure that had started with laughter and dreams had ended in tragedy. The mountains took my friend, leaving me with memories and a painful reminder of the unpredictability of nature. Jake's death changed me. The mountains, once a place of escape and thrill, now echoed with the silence of loss. I never went back to climbing. Instead, I carried Jake's memory with me, a reminder to respect the power and fury of nature. The snowy mountains of Wyoming remain, majestic and serene, but they are also a grave site, a place where a part of me will always linger, buried under the snow with my best friend.